The church gave us two parables today about the owners of vineyards. And both parables really are about us. I think sometimes it's easy to look at the parables, especially the ones that are addressed to the high priests and scribes, and think that, oh, that has to do with them. It actually has to do with all of us. So I want to just glance at both of these parables. They're both pretty powerful. The first came from the Old Testament. Isaiah gave us a parable. And Isaiah is writing hundreds of years before Jesus. This is he's preaching in a way to the Jewish people. And so he starts off with saying, "Let me now sing of my friend's song concerning his vineyard." And he goes on to talk about this vineyard that his friend had. Obviously, this is a parable. And this vineyard had been he got a wine press, built a watchtower, got choicest vines that he could, but the vines did not provide good grapes. Instead, they provided only the wild grapes. They would taste bitter. There's nothing you can do to rescue a bitter grape. It's not going to be good for wine or anything. So he says, fine, I'm just going to tear down the hedge and let it be trampled over by the animals and just kind of give up on this vineyard. Then goes on to say that as the parable comes to an end, Isaiah explains that the vineyard is the house of Israel. These are God's people, the Jewish people here in this context. And he says that God looked for justice from his vineyard, his people, and he didn't find any. Instead, he found outcry. He found bloodshed. It's an interesting parable. There's a couple things that kind of stand out to me here. First of all, I like that he refers to his friend. I mean, that's God, right? He's calling God his friend, which is not a common theme that comes up specifically in the Old Testament. Jesus uses that language, right? I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. But it's kind of beautiful that Isaiah, who talks about his Lord, who gives commandments, right? Whose will is the most important thing. I want to do God's will. At the same time, he refers to him as friend. He holds up Lord and friend at the same time. Friend implies, right, some intimacy there, that my friend cares about my feelings, cares about what's going on in my life. It also implies mutuality. I also care about what's going on in my friend's heart, what's going on in his life. And so it's just a really beautiful kind of language that Isaiah is using here. And it's also helpful, I think, that he clarifies what the vineyard is standing for. The vineyard stands for God's people. You get the parables. Sometimes there's not always explanations to the parables. That's a helpful little insight here. That this vineyard was not bearing good fruit. And God expected his vineyard to bear good fruit. It's a question for us then, as we're kind of the inheritors of this, right? We may not be the house of Israel of the Old Testament, but we're God's people. God has chosen us. He's made us his people. And we're expected to still bear good fruit. We should look at our lives. Is my life bearing good fruit? Am I giving witness to my faith in a way that other people could look at me and say, yeah, that's a Christian? They would know by the way that we're living that our life is bearing good fruit. Do we see the fruits of our faith? Do we see the fruits of the virtue that we're striving for and the beauty of the sacraments in our lives? Do we see it in the encounters that we have, the way that we talk to other people, the way that we engage with our spouse when we're in a bad mood, the way that we talk about our boss when he's not looking? Are we bearing good fruit in the way that we're living? That's what the Lord is calling for, first of all. But then the gospel, it's kind of an interesting one. Another parable about a man who owns a vineyard. And he has done the same thing, right? He put a hedge around it, built a tower, dug a wine press, almost like Jesus is reminding us of the other parable. But then he goes on to say that the landowner leases out his vineyard to some tenants who are supposed to take care of it. But whenever the owner of the vineyard sent his servants, they would beat the servants, they would kill the servants. He finally decides he's going to send them his son. They do the same thing to the son. And so he makes it clear that that vineyard is going to be taken away from them and given to other tenants, right? This is a judgment on the elders and the chief priests. And that's who Jesus was addressing this parable to. So if the vineyard is still God's people, in this parable then, these tenants who are supposed to be taking care of the vineyard are the high priests. They are the elders, the people who are supposed to be caring for God's people, kind of nurturing the good fruit from them. Instead, they've been just taking care of themselves. They've literally killed the prophets, and they're going to kill Jesus sometime after this. I guess as what stands out for me here is this isn't just about the chief priests and the elders of the Old Testament, of Jesus' time. This is even about today's ordained priests and bishops who also have a care for God's people. And if the ordained ministers of the church are not caring for the faithful, are not proclaiming the truth of the church, are not being faithful to our Lord's word, then they're going to have to answer the Lord for that. There will be judgment for them. They're not doing the Lord's will. But at the same time, this is for all of us. Remember, after Vatican II, the church did a better job of emphasizing the fact that we are all priests. We're not all priests in the sense that the ordained minister is, but we all share in Jesus' priesthood by virtue of our baptism. Jesus is priest, prophet, and king. And when we are baptized, we're united to Jesus, we are also priest, prophet, and king, which means that we have an obligation to be priests in the world, which means that we should be offering sacrifice. Like that's the main job of a priest. The priest, ordained priest, offers the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the altar. The priests of the Old Testament offered sacrifices. They slaughtered lambs and that sort of thing. We, as God's people, who are all the royal priesthood, we're called to offer sacrifices to God. All the little irritating things that happen in the course of your day, if you can turn that into a prayer, you're exercising your priesthood. If you can turn that into a sacrifice on behalf of somebody else, offer it to the Lord. That's you exercising your priesthood. Every time you pray for somebody else, you're interceding for them. That's an act of your priesthood, because that's one of the jobs of a priest, is to pray for others. And a priest is supposed to help sanctify the people around them. Are you in some ways working to sanctify the world around you? Are you helping to make the world a better place, a holier place, a more just place? That's you exercising your priesthood. So this isn't just a parable of condemnation on the chief priests of Jesus' time who were not living up to their job. And it's not just a condemnation on the ordained ministers who are not living up to their job. It's also a call to action for all of us to exercise the priesthood that Jesus has given to us by virtue of our baptism and our confirmation, that we live out our faith in such a way that it helps to make the world a holier place. So whether we're the vineyard or the priests, we're both. Either way, we're called to bear good fruit. So today we ask God for that grace, that we would bear fruit with our faith, fruit that will last.